right, so welcome to the Queer Authors Roundtable. I'm the host, Vivian Dunn, and my guests today I'm really excited about are Isaac Grisham. He's the author of The King's Son. It's called the Brass Machine trilogy. Is that right, Isaac?
Yes, it is.
And you have 3 out already.
Yep.
Awesome. So this is the first one that we're going to be talking about today. Great. All right. And then we have J.E. Leek, who is the author of In the Shadow of the Past. That's the first in the Shadow trilogy?
Yep, there's 4 books.
First, there's 4. Okay, wow, that's amazing.
Well, there will be.
Right.
2 published right now.
There's one coming out early next year.
Actually,
February.
I'm hoping that it'll be the end of the summer.
The end of this summer?
I'm hoping, yeah.
In the Shadow of the Truth?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
I know, right? Don't tell anybody.
I actually want to talk about this with both of you. I know, Isaac, your trilogy came kind of like a year and a half apart-ish?
Yeah. So I think the first one, The King's Son, was after it was released. The next one was a year later, and then the last one was 2 years later.
Okay. And then J.E., yours were like a year most apart.
I think they wound up being like 6 months, because when I put up the pre-order on Amazon, I always push it out the furthest that they will let me because pressure. And it usually winds out to be like 6 months, because you can move your date forward, but you cannot push it back. Amazon gods will hate you for it.
Really? I had no
punish
idea.
you mightily. Yeah, like if you have pre-orders and you push it out, like they'll cancel all your pre-orders, but you can pull it in and that's fine. So I always push it as far out as I can, and that's a year. So that's
why the third one is currently for February of next year. Okay.
Correct. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's good for authors to know, because I did not know that all.
Yeah. So the first book came out in July of 2021. And then the next one came out in February. So I'm hoping end of summer for this, but I had a few hiccups once I got to the beta stage. So I kind of threw a wrench in there.
So your second book came out in February of this year, and
Correct.
now you've got the third, hopefully for the end of the summer, maybe a little later, but.
Yep.
So for both of you, my question to start would be, how are you so prolific? Like, how do you just write all of them, or like at once, or? Because I wrote my first one, it took me 5 years. There's a lot of research as well, as I'm sure J.E. knows. And I just, as soon as I published it, I crashed. I completely crashed. So I wrote a little bit, but I'm still not done with the first draft of the second book. So how did you do it? I really want to know.
Go ahead, Isaac.
For J.E. too, it's like if you have these 6 months apart, is there a lot of writing overlap in there?
Here's what I did. I wrote the entire story. And because I didn't want to get it to a situation where I'd written part 1 or part 2 or whatever, and I just ran out of steam or ideas. And so then you have a pissed off audience that's paid money and is waiting for your story, invested their time and emotions and everything, and then you screw them over. So I didn't want to do that. So I wrote the entire thing. So it's all pretty much written. And actually the reason it's taking 6 months in between is that's just how long it's taking me to go through each different book and, fix, stupid draft stuff. Basically it's a finished draft. And so I'm going in and I'm fixing some things that I just kind of put parentheses like, add this later. insert sex scenes here. So, you know, and so you just go back and you finish that stuff up. So yeah. So I'm not very prolific. I basically have one really, really long story that is in 4 really long books. And I mean, I feel like I haven't written anything new in ages, you know, so, and I had no idea how crazy self-publishing was. So who has time to write things, honestly? So
Yeah. So
I'm in
you don't,
awe. I'm in awe of prolific writers, truly prolific writers.
me too, yes.
I am not one of them.
Gotcha. So that's kind of smart. And I was thinking of maybe finishing the 3rd while I'm doing the 2nd, you know, because I already basically know what happens. So you don't have an editor?
Yes, I have an editor.
Okay.
And also I need to, in the back of each book, I put the pre-order for the next book. So that has to be ready so that you get that roll from book to book to book. So they finished like the 2nd one. It's like, oh, I can't wait for the 3rd one. I'm going to pre-order it because I want that baby to drop as soon as it comes out. And so you make sure you have your links in the back ready to go.
So did you do a lot of research about that? Like as a strategy?
Marketing and stuff? Yeah.
Okay.
It's crazy.
I did not
crazy.
do that. I think I published too early, but that's another story. So Isaac, how about you?
Well, let's see, like the first one, my idea for the first one, you know, started back when I was in college. Like the ending scene for it came to me and the character started to formulate, but it was, you know, over, you know, 12, 13 years later before it was published. So it was a very long time with this story percolating. And originally it was supposed to end with the first one. It wasn't supposed to be a trilogy. You know, slight spoiler alert, there's a, you know, a shocking ending. It's kind of not great for the main character. He's left in a bad place. And that was kind of the point of the story was, you know, all these things can lead to something not great. And then as I actually went down to write out the story, I'm like, that's a terrible place to leave your main characters. And plus I love this world that I had created. And I wanted to explore that more. So yeah, it took me, obviously, it didn't take me 12, 13 years to write the book, but the story lasted that long. And I pantsed my way through it, the whole pantser versus plotter. It is definitely a here's the characters and wandering, because again, that last scene is what came to me first. I'm like, okay, how do I get them to that last scene? And so like, we're just gonna, you know, meander our way through various adventures to get to that scene. With the follow-up novels, you know, it took me, and I did overlap, kind of like I was alluding to earlier. So even while The King's Son was awaiting publication, I started working on The King's Fear. So that's why there was only a year later, you know, I published The King's Son and only a year later, because I had started writing it well before Son came out. But I also learned I can't pants my way through this anymore. I don't like the full, like, complete outline, all the details in there. I gave myself a loose outline, like here's where the story is here, here's how they're going to progress and get to that last scene. So that's why the last 2 books took a considerably shorter time to do.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I do the same. I pantsed my way through the first draft, which was actually my book 1 and 2. I wrote a really long draft, like J.E, you said you did. But my editor was like, you need to either cut or split it. So I pantsed my way through that. But then when I, you know, split it and had to add in a little more plot, I realized I needed to start tracking this and really thinking about, you know, like what you said, getting the major points down, like knowing the major turns and filling in later all the details and, you know, dialogue and stuff. So marketing, because when I was looking at you guys, you know, your covers, your website, just how tight everything was. I felt like you had both done research on, I'm a marketer by trade. I felt like you had both done research about marketing and had sort of a strategy going into it. Is that correct?
I don't know about a strategy, but yeah, I did tons of research on marketing. Yeah.
So how?
So it's overwhelming. I think the first thing I did was I bought a course called Self-Publishing 101 by Mark Dawson. And because, I was piecemealing everything together, and some people would say this, some people would say that, and it was it wasn't cheap, but I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. So let's go. And so I bought that, and worth every penny. I mean, it just walks through everything, and it walks through, the strategies and this and that. And then like once a quarter, Brian Cohen has his Amazon ads challenge, and that's free. And he talks all about, explains the mysteries of Amazon ads and stuff like that. And that was worth it as well. And so, I dipped my toe into that. And so, yeah, and just joined Facebook groups on marketing and stuff. Like the Dawson thing has Facebook groups, so you can ask questions. They're very responsive and anything you want to know.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, that was great.
Any other resources that really helped you, or were those it?
No, that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did that cover covers and, like you said, strategy with series?
Yes, it covered a little bit of strategy with that. The covers, I actually took another course on that because there are, conventions of the genres. And if you get that wrong, I mean, Brian Cohen hits on that really hard too. It's like, well, why isn't your ad converting? It's like, well, what's your cover look like? And does it line up with all the covers in your genre and categories and stuff like that? So yeah, so I learned about that too. And I'm a graphic artist, so I do my own covers, which adds another to the workload.
They look really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, I'm still kind of birthing the third one, so I'm just like, okay.
Okay, so you followed what was kind of happening. Like you're like, if I'm doing this book thing, I'm going to do it and succeed at it. So that's your goal.
Do or do not, there is no try.
Okay, perfect. And Isaac, did you have a marketing strategy, or what were your resources?
I mean, I was not as prepared as J.E. was. I did not go in. I mean, I've learned a lot since then. Kind of like she was speaking to earlier, she would finish book one and have, the pre-order for book two were already ready to go, like right there in the ebook. Like that is excellent marketing strategy, marketing advice. I forget there's a phrase for that, like almost like leading the readers that way.
A funnel.
Like a funnel. That's it. See, she's done the research. These are things that I learned about afterwards. So, I mean, I had a website. It's gone through many revisions. I started getting into Twitter when I published the first book. I mean, a lot of these things that people who are better prepared would do ahead of time, like build up that anticipation, or I won't say audience, but just build up a little bit of anticipation, I mean, isn't the word I'm looking for, but an audience. Excitement, buzz around it. So I used some services that would like tweet out on Facebook and on Twitter and Instagram, like, oh, hey, we were sponsoring this book. I did a lot of reviews, or not reviews, but book reviewers who would read your book, review it, but also like ask questions and do interviews. And some of it was kind of fun. Like they would like ask your characters questions and then you would answer as them. And I thought that was an interesting way for the audience to get to know your characters, but also for the author to be like, oh, what would, character A or B think in this situation? And they could be silly, goofy ones, like, what would, Prince Kitsune have on his nightstand? Like, oh, that's a good question. What would he have on his nightstand? But
That is fun. That sounds
yeah.
like fun.
The biggest thing for me, marketing wise, was I wanted to have a cover that would be eye-catchy. That was kind of my first thing. That was one of the biggest pieces of advice that I read about and saw. And I had certain ideas of what I wanted and didn't want. So that's kind of was my first push. But since then, I've done other things as well. So
yeah. So you guys are pretty smart.
I'm glad we come off that way.
For me as a marketer, you know all the rules, and I'm the type of person that kind of like decides not to do them. So, but I'm kind of finding a happy middle. I think I'm getting to like a happy middle. So we'll see what happens, but I am, everything is evolving, like not only our strategies, our characters, us as humans, the world we live in, literally everything is constantly moving and changing. So I'm open to all of it. So if I hate one thing, I'm not really much of a hater but anyway, if I'm not keen on one thing one day, and then the next day I just accept that, like, okay, I changed my mind. I'm open to change, basically what I'm trying to say. So, but you guys, yeah. And Isaac, your cover, I love black and then neon color together. I use that a lot I was using it in the ads that I would run. I think I used it a little bit for the ads for this show. I just love it. I think it really pops, as the cool kids say, but your covers, both of your covers, like J.E, your cover is spot on, like historical romance between two women. I immediately think that when I look at your book cover, and Isaac, yours, you can just tell there's magic in it, and it does pop, and you guys have great, consistency with your titles. So these are things that, budding authors want to think about, definitely. You want to consider these things, consider taking a class, be open to it. You might, if you're trying to sell, you got to put some money into it first. Like, that's just a fact. Mm-hmm. Nobody can buy your book if they don't know it exists, so marketing is huge. Oh, final question I want to ask you guys right now. Why did you choose to self-publish?
All right. Why did I self-publish? Like there continues to be a discussion, throughout the writer community and in the industry about what is better, self-publishing versus traditional publishing. And I'm sure we're all familiar with this. And there are certain stereotypes that are kind of attributed to both, like, oh, you're self-published, so you're going to have a lot of errors in there, it's going to be lower quality, and it's something that we continue to fight against. Arguments aside, I tend to think like, okay, traditional publishers they're just businesses, and they can only publish, print and market and sell so many books a year, but there are thousands of other stories that deserve to be told, that should be out there and should be read. They are no less deserving of that space and that attention. And certainly I've read some self-published books that are lower quality, that could have used a better cover or a read through somebody else. But I've also read traditionally published books that I was like, this does not deserve the shelf space in the bookstore. So just because something is traditionally published doesn't necessarily mean anything. I have read some amazing pieces from self-published authors that I think should get more attention. So for me, when I started looking at publishing The King's Son, I began to sense, like as I said earlier, I was just starting to get into Twitter and talking to other people, and I began to sense this really big community of people who were very kind and very willing to give you ideas and advice, resources that I didn't think a traditional publisher would provide you. I mean, they are just businesses after all. So I wanted to delve into that side of the pool, I guess. Like I want to throw myself with the people who are going to be there and support you, and make you a better writer overall. So that's kind of why I chose that path. Plus I like to have more control over my products.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. They want more control, artistic control. And self-publishers these days a lot of us are getting smarter. We're getting editors, we're getting beta readers, we're taking courses, we're putting some thought, looking at the strategies that traditional, we have the internet now, like we can basically learn whatever we want. So yeah, just taking some tips from the professionals and putting more effort into our work. So I think, you're right. There's still some that are kind of like, oh man, you could have put a little more time in, or, prepared a little more. But I think a lot of them are getting better to the point where it's hard to distinguish between the two. So that's awesome, Isaac. I really liked your answer a lot. Thank you. And J.E., how about for you?
Yeah, I mean, like Isaac said, the way I prepare is, I'm a professional. I'm not somebody that, oh, I had a story and I'm gonna throw it out there. What's an editor? I didn't want to do that. And I'm not a fast writer. It takes me a while. And honestly, I never ever thought about going to a publisher. Just wasn't, I never queried anything or even looked up, how to do that, or what kind of letter should I write, how to get an agent. Because
you save yourself time.
I hear that. And yeah, I'm not a fast writer. Honestly, I didn't think a publisher would put up with my, timeline of things. And also, they'll push your book for, X amount of months, and then you're left doing all the marketing yourself anyway. And I'm like, if I'm going to do that, why am I giving them royalties for that, that little kickoff that they're going to give you at the beginning? And then you're left doing everything else, and you're still not getting as much for your book as. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to learn how to do it. And that's what I did. And I'd say, yeah, I never even thought about going, traditional or even small house. It just never occurred to me.
Yeah, I queried like 7 or 8 times, and I mean my decision to self-publish was a little different than you guys, but I'm happy I did it, because you're right. That was a huge selling point for me, was that even traditionally publishing, they'll like give your book a little push, like you said, and then it's up to you. So you're still putting all that time and effort and money probably into marketing your novel. And then you get they get 88%, and then you have to pay your agent out of your 10% that you get. Maybe that might even be high, to be honest. Might be like 7 or 8%. But I was just like, yeah, F that. I'm gonna just bulldoze through this and learn and tough it out, basically. And it's been very, I don't want to say easier because it's a lot of work, but it's not as bad as, you're not alone. Like Isaac, like you said, you know, you're not alone. You've got feedback, there's a community.
Yeah, I can't say enough about the community. I mean, it is just, I mean, I belong to a Facebook group called I Read Indies, and it's all, you know, sapphic literature for independent. There's a reader group and an author group. So, you know, and that is wonderful. I mean, they're just veteran, the veteran writers who will help you. And there's a website and there's resources there, and it's all free. And
What's
yeah,
that called?
ireadindies.com.
And it's all lesbian?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. I'm never on Facebook, but they do have a lot of groups. There's a, like I said, the internet, you know, like you can find whatever you're into, you can find other people that are into that, you know. So if there's people that are going to read your book, you can find them. You don't need some huge, you know, name or entity taking most of your royalties and basically doing the same thing that you would be doing, you know. So obviously they can get you like interviews, you know, maybe with the, I don't know, the New Yorker or something. I don't even know if that's true. But you know what I mean? They have connections.
Yeah.
They'll get your work critically reviewed by some hotshot in some great magazine, which is great. And I'm not knocking traditionally published authors. I think
No, me neither. Good luck to
not
you.
easy either.
Yeah.
And it's, like I said, they still have to shoulder a lot of the marketing. So that's really, really hard. So yeah, awesome. So, all right. Shall we get into the works?
So in The King's Son, the opening chapter, the main character, Prince Kitsune, is banished from his kingdom by his father, the king. And the reason given is that he is because of who he takes to bed. And Prince Kitsune is bisexual. Basically, in the world that he lives in, it's not a thing, it's not frowned upon. So he is just totally taken aback and you know, kind of sideswiped, like what is going on? But before he even has a chance to process that, he's banished from the kingdom. So he, you know, grew up in the palace, and he was basically a, you know, a prince with riches and, you know, education and everything he could ever want. And now he's roaming the countryside by himself. But he does find resources in other people, but at some point he is kidnapped by some mercenaries and saved by this other main character, but he doesn't know him yet. But saved by this other character, and he's still trying to please his father. He's still trying to, he wants to find his way back in to his father's heart, back into the kingdom, back into his future, what he had assumed would be his future. So he's at this point where he's just confused about what he should do. You know, should he be himself and pursue who he thinks he is, or should he put that aside and try to be who his father thinks he is? And then also along the way, he finds this other character called the Lady of the Mountain, who's kind of like a spiritual presence in his life. Lady of the Mountain kind of lives in his head, not a physical person walking beside him, but speaks to him in his head. So that's kind of the background needed to get to the passage here.
Where in the story is this passage? Where does this come up? Is it more the beginning, or?
It's still toward the beginning. So like he hasn't met the other main character yet. So about 70 pages in, so not even quite a third of the way through. But as far as like where he's at, he is asleep. This is a dream sequence, so to speak. So it's not happening in the real world. But yeah, it is more towards the beginning of the story. So he's,
Okay.
in a way, it's almost like the precursor to the meat, for romantic, novels. This is almost like right before the meat, the cute meat.
All right. Well, take it away.
All right. So this chapter is actually called Myobu, which is the name of the other character. But Kitsune stood alone in the middle of a vast forest of tall redwoods, feeling particularly minuscule. Despite the sun directly above, it was dim under the canopy of trees, the surrounding colors cool and muted. He saw no footpaths around him, and the grass and leaves littering the ground remained undisturbed. He wondered how he had arrived here. It also made him question if anyone lived in the cottage before him. Nestled on the side of a hill, the warm and welcoming house seemed almost organic, like it had grown right up out of the ground. The windows were closed and shuttered, though, and no smoke issued from the chimney. It appeared nobody was home. Yet, Kitsune knew, or at least somehow instinctively felt, someone was inside the cottage waiting for him. Or had the prince been the one waiting to enter? The individual was a man in search of love. The jolting certainty of that fact startled Kitsune, as did a powerful belief that if he stepped foot inside of the home, the decision would work to define the path of his life. This frightened him. Letting another man affect him in such ways contradicted the edict given unto him by his father. He began to turn away, to run from the warmth of the house and his destiny, set on remaining true to his father's will. Then he saw the Lady of the Mountain now stood a few footfalls from him, and he stopped short. "It is all right," said the lady, her straight black hair and green dress rustling in the wind, a wind that Kitsune did not feel. Her presence did not surprise him. She had been with him and protected him since she first drew him into her dreamscape back at the Eastern Gate, hanging around his neck in the Hoshi no Tama. In one sense, she was his guardian. In another, like now, she acted as a spiritual guide. The lady continued, "You can go down this path. It doesn't change who you are. You can go inside." Pointing to the cottage, Kitsune said, "I don't know who that man is, but I perceive he is desperately looking for love. I have never desired the type of union he seeks. My needs are more basic. Regardless, both needs are shameful things." He lowered his head as he remembered his father's stern, disapproving gaze. The king turned him away because of who he was, and others had died. "I am a shameful thing." "No, Kitsune," replied the lady. She appeared in front of him, down on her knees and stroking the side of his face with her hand. He wanted her to stand up, knowing he was not yet worthy of such affection. "You are beautiful and perfect and deserving. What I say is true, and you should trust in me, for you are of me." "I know," he replied to the last statement. They stared at each other, wondering where the revelation came from. It was as though she had plucked the fact right out of the fabric of the universe, the knowledge natural. Without understanding why, he added, "Grandmother." Confusion crossed her face, but her usual air of serene clarity soon replaced it. They nodded at each other in mutual understanding. Not everything made sense yet to Kitsune, as facts didn't quite line up, but he recalled the stories of his grandfather having met and married one of the yokai. The tales never explained how his wife died, or if she had passed on at all, did not reveal the past king to possess the cruel nature that would lead him to murder. If it was true, though, it would explain why his father, with the blood of a yokai running through his veins, was so intelligent yet emotionally distant. "Go and speak with him," the lady said, turning him toward the cottage and giving him a gentle shove. "Simply meeting him does not constitute a sinful nature in anyone's eyes. I will speak with you soon." Kitsune felt like he had made a grand decision, and with it, a great burden lifted from his soul. In its place fell a wave of giddiness, and he barely kept and he barely kept from sprinting across the forest floor to the cottage entrance. He looked back, finding the lady had disappeared from view, a ray of dusty sunlight illuminating the area where she had been standing. Turning back to the door, he placed one hand against the wood, feeling pleasantly warm to the touch. With a turn of the handle, he pushed it open and walked through.
Right, thank you. That was awesome. So, first, I just want to ask, why did you pick that particular passage to read?
That scene is for Kitsune, it's a very personal, it's very personal to him. He's beginning to address one of the big decisions in the story. Like I said earlier, is he going to end up pursuing what his father wants him to be, or is he going to end up pursuing who he truly is? And these are things that I think everyone, whether it could necessarily a queer decision, being who you are, expressing your natural self, but it could be anything in your life. Everyone comes across these types of decisions. It could be, are you going to follow your parents' footsteps in a career, or are you going to, strike out and do your own thing? These are things that we all can identify with, I think. This scene in particular for me it's based off of a dream that I had, 12, 13 years ago, where I was living out in New Mexico and had a decision whether I wanted to stay there. I was not particularly happy there, or I could move back to Illinois, where I'm from. It was a time for me, very emotional, very uncertain. And I had this dream where I was standing in the woods, and a friend of mine, her name is Celeste, showed up right there. And again, there was a cottage in my dream, and there was, a particular person that, I, found fancy, sitting, living in there. And, so Celeste, my lady of the mountains, said, this is fine. This is okay. You can move forward. So for me, in my dream, it wasn't a question of me questioning, who I am as a person. Am I queer? Is that okay? I was definitely very queer at the time and settle into that. But it was another thing where I'm like, am I okay making this decision? Is it the right thing to do? And it did. I went through the door, and I moved back to Illinois. And in the past 12, 13 years, I have had to deal with that decision. And it's had both really, really great ramifications. Things have come from that, and also some not so great things that have come from it. But that's life. So that's why that scene means a lot to me, because it's one of those things that where me as the author has put myself into the story, or something that I have experienced. Because I think that a lot of us can understand that.
Yeah, I mean, we have to write what we know to some degree, or research about it. And okay, so that scene was it's a turning point, and it's kind of a poignant moment on top of that. So, all right, great. So J.E., do you want to start with a question, or
Sure.
Start? You want to go?
Sure. So I think I read in your blog about Celeste, and I just thought it was really lovely how you honored her by sort of making her your lady of the mountain. What role does spirituality play in your writing, if any?
Oh, sure. I would say, like, for Celeste, she was so in where I live in New Mexico, it was Alamogordo, New Mexico, and there is oh, sorry, Cooper, a dog. It's nestled against a range of mountains, and there are a few of them that align so that it looks like a lady laying down in the mountains, and they call that formation the Lady of Mountain. So that's kind of where I get that name from, and that's a big part of the King's Son. So yeah, I definitely attributed Celeste, who was a friend of mine out there, not that she was a spiritual leader to me outside of that dream that I had where she, appeared, and but she was a good friend that made a difference in my life, and I did want to honor that. She has since passed away, unfortunately, and she never got to know how much she really meant to me. But as far as spirituality goes, it does. I mentioned the yokai in the passage that I read, and the yokai are very there's a whole religion in the world built around these spirits that manifest themselves, and they do make decisions based upon this religion. So it is spirituality. Definitely takes part in the series. It plays a major part. I tend to think of spirituality as almost like introspection in a way. How do we interact with the world around us? Who are we in it? And these are questions that I ask a lot. And I think a lot of people nowadays tend to think of the world as themselves. This is me in the world. What am I going to get from it? Yeah, how do I interact with it? But spirituality, I think, is more like I am a part of this world, and how can I contribute to it? And not necessarily what can I get from it, but what can how can I work with it? So I tend to go down that path of spirituality more so. And as far as like the yokai, like they aren't just random spirits that are invisible. Like they take physical form. They are very real. They have flesh and blood. They're just slightly magical. That gives them that ethereal sense that would make any of us, mere humans, be like, okay, this is something that's really fantastic. And look toward, and the yokai are very live with the environment. They're very attuned to the environment. So again, that's kind of going into that whole like, how can I work with what's around me instead of what can I take from the world around me?
So if I can cut in real quick, would you say that sort of, so it's an outlook that you share, and it kind of just naturally, goes, it's part of your story, because it's important to you, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, that way of looking at the world. Would you say that sort of vibe flows through the whole series?
It does, and more so than I even intended to begin with. I can't really give anything like for the third book, especially. It becomes very apparent. I go into this whole thing where I basically talk about how it's one of those stories where like if we don't watch what we're doing, we're going to destroy the planet type of thing. We're going to destroy ourselves at the very least. And there are consequences of that, and the consequences of that aren't necessarily limited to our planet, our time. I really don't want to go into too many details there because it's going to give away a whole lot of stuff. But the whole point was, we should care, because we can't be short-sighted, because the consequences of our actions may extend beyond our wildest imagination.
Yeah, so I mean, that's definitely how I feel, that this world, it has ramifications in other worlds, and that's based in physics too. Like quantum physics proves, pretty darn close, even though we haven't seen it, that it's possible for other realms living right around us. I love that that's an aspect of your story. I think that's really beautiful and very important to a lot of people, I would think. Do you think that's kind of like a thing in fantasy, like this whole spiritual, magical, maybe not even magical, we can leave that out, but do you think your novel, or your story, your series kind of stands out because of that? Or is it is that part of the fantasy world? I don't really read fantasy, so you have to enlighten me, please.
I mean, not necessarily. I think that a lot of fantasy will have, if not so I mean, a lot of like I'll pick on Game of Thrones. I mean, you've got your politics going on, you've got your relationships going on, you've got magic going on, and there's even religion is going on. You got multiple religions in that series and show, all leading to these conflicts. And I think a lot of well-written fantasy uses all of those, politics, relationships, religion, and this applies maybe to not maybe, it applies to sci-fi as well, where you got a future where all these types of things interact and can create a very compelling, riveting story.
So it's so complex. Like, I mean, this actually goes into another question of mine. What are your inspirations for writing fantasy? And like, because those worlds, the authors, you make it up. It's purely, you create these whole worlds, which just seems amazing and a little crazy to me. And they're very complex, and they can have to do with whatever the author wants them to do with. So how do you look at fantasy? Like, what's your inspiration? How do you use fantasy? Do you even use fantasy to get these messages across? Like, or do you just want a good story and, action? And
I've seen fantasy sci-fi movies and I've read fantasy sci-fi books where the creators are making a world just because they can. And it can be beautiful, it could be gorgeous, it could be this amazing tapestry, but if it doesn't actually facilitate the story or say something about what the characters are going through, then it's wasted. So I know a lot of people really enjoy world building. Like, it is a huge thing, and it is fun. It is really fun. But when, like in the King's Son, like there is a magic system, but I kept it very minimal because I didn't want it to be this bogged down like thing that people have to memorize. I just wanted to be like, there's magic here, and some people have it and some people don't. And I didn't really get into the details of how they can use, how it's used, why it's there. It just is. And now in the following books, it got a little bit more detailed just because they had to make it more interesting. But in the end, how did it facilitate the story? How does the scenes, the worlds, the buildings, I love talking about buildings and castles, and why are they there? Why the characters are there for a reason? What is it? What are they feeling? How is it backing that up? And that goes, it goes into like the religion aspect, the politics, that's all a great tapestry for the background. But if it's not facilitating the story, then it's just useless filler. But as far as like what inspired me to tell to in this fantasy room, what inspired me? I mean, there's so much.
Why did you use fantasy to tell this story?
Sure. Again, like the first scene that came to me, what I could talk about before, was the last scene, or one of the last scenes, where and I can't remember the name. It was a short story, a children's story. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's where a monster, a skeleton, has been taking the children from a small village and eating them, but then the hero of the story, another child, has to go out and confront the giant skeleton monster, and he knows that the heart of this monster isn't where we think of as a heart being. It's actually in his his hand or something. So when he goes confront, he's like, I'll give you one shot, you can take me down right now with an arrow, shoot me in the heart. And the monster expects him to shoot him in the chest, but he actually gets him in the right place. For some reason, I read that back in college. It really stuck with me. Like, I wanted to create something. Obviously, that in itself is a fantasy scene. It's something that's born of imagination. You're not going to find that in the real world. So I had to create a whole series of events to get a character from point A to point B. So yeah, I can't remember exactly how Kitsune himself was born in my mind.
Really?
Yeah, I don't remember anymore. I remember I have drawings of him. I did some sketches of him in college as well. So for a minute, like it was just like some character that I had in my head, and he existed on paper and existed in a scene, but I hadn't really got him to that scene yet. Uh, there were two big main inspirations for the King's Son. So one of them was that children's story. I need to figure out what that is called. It's a really good one. But also James Blunt, the musician, his album Back to Bedlam, which was beautiful at the time. I mean, it's beautiful now, but especially then I think it was around 2004, 2005, that album came out. And so this is in the wake of 9/11, and he had been sent overseas as part of, the war, the reaction to terrorist events. So that whole album was him dealing with kind of like the ramifications of that, of being a part of that. And very, very soulful, very, at least for me as, a college student at the time, also just living in the wake of those incidents, how he dealt with that type of trauma. So yeah, that was part of why I wanted to tell the story from Kitsune, was like, how is he living through this type of trauma? So there are some scenes, some lines in there that are born from that album as well. I got a little off track there, sorry.
No, that's a great response. So basically, to you, it's all about the story and, building the worlds. You can do anything you want in fantasy, but are you being, not meaningful, but I mean, kind of meaningful? Like, are you
just creating places to create places, or are you creating places to help prop up, to help the story move along? Yeah.
Or like, I kind of want to say like mental masturbation, on the page, and there's your fantasy, right? I don't know if people do that, but probably. But great, that's awesome. That's awesome. So J.E., do you want to do another question?
Sure. So you have a beautiful speaking voice and you are a narrator. So why aren't your books narrated by you? Narrated, period. They're not on audio.
They are not narrated at all at this point. I had never thought about doing narration, period. I don't like the sound of my own voice personally. I don't know how anyone else can stand it, but
wow.
At the beginning of the pandemic, I found some writings that I did in high school. So I wrote a book, a dinosaur related book. It was kind of like another follow-up to the Jurassic Park Lost World by Michael Crichton. So I had written this whole book, and it's been lost. Most of it's been lost to time. Cooper actually ate the last surviving physical copy, probably for the best. But I found a few passages, and I read them on. I had a glass of wine, and I read them online for people to view. And I had a blooper reel, and I had a really good time doing it. But then a few months later, Ash Knight, who wrote the novel Stay, reached out to me. She's like, I would love for you to narrate my book. And I'm all like, did you mean message me? I don't know. My name's Isaac. Who are you trying to talk to? She's like, no, I really liked this, the thing you put out there. I'm like, that was a joke. I was tipsy. I'm like, what? But I did end up doing that for her. I learned a lot. I mean, it's just like writing in a way where, I created I went back into the closet. I created a recording session, booth in the back of my closet with blankets and clothes all around, table, and spent so much time, learned that's a bad idea. Every room in the house is against the outside. So like, if it rains, if the birds are outside and the snow's melting, it's making sound. It's terrible. But I did enjoy doing it. And right now I'm doing a fantasy novel, Descent of Ravens by A.C. Andrews. So I'm about, I should be finishing that up in about a month. And he has a second book coming out, which I will probably end up doing. But I would like to do mine as well. So I'm kind of using these other books as like a way of fine tuning my process and what works, doesn't work. Before I, so I'm kind of being selfish in that way. I'm like, I'm going to do these other books to learn the process and get better, and then do mine. But yeah, my plan is to maybe get at least the first one done late this year, early next year. Hopefully, like, don't quote me on this, but hopefully next year to come out.
Cool. That would be great. I know, and we'll talk about audiobooks later as well, but audiobooks are, hitting the fan right now. So,
Yeah.
So I have a question about the characterization. So in your back cover blurb, it says that Kitsune dreamed of leading his father's war, or army in his father's war, which gets gives a lot of ambition and just wanting power and perhaps even violence, being okay with violence, or or maybe believing in what his father's war is. It says a lot, basically. And then we meet him in this scene that you have, and he's very meek, and he's with the redwoods, and he feels small, and he's kind of unsure, should he go in that place or not. He's worried about his father. So you have this polarity within him, and I just wanted to know why you chose to do that. If you chose to do that intentionally, did it come organically, or was it something you always saw the character kind of vacillating between the two? Or I think I have partly a question about power as well, because he's meek. It just reminds me of somebody who's maybe been bullied, or even by his father. He could have been controlled or bullied in some way by his father, so maybe brainwashed into thinking he really wants these things, but maybe he doesn't, because he's not really like that. So do you have anything to say about what the process or thinking was behind that?
Sure. I was thinking, it actually kind of occurred to me recently how much Prince Kitsune is kind of like Princess Jasmine from Disney's Aladdin, where he grew up in this, he is never allowed to leave the palace. He grew up in a very controlled environment, where his father wasn't necessarily a bully towards him, but was very distant, but controlled the people he hung around with, he was exposed to, the education he received, the training he received. So yes, Kitsune, the character, grew up in a very controlled, contained environment. And I don't think his love and devotion to his father was manufactured. I think that was genuine. It just maybe didn't come from the right place. Obviously, some children don't grow up wanting to make their parents happy, but I think a lot of people do. They want to succeed to make them proud. And I think Kitsune is definitely aiming for that. He's growing up thinking, what I see my father doing these things, conquering land, subjugating people, and these must be things that a king will do. And I'm going to be king one day. So what can I do to earn that, get my father's respect? So yeah, he genuinely wants to do these things that we sit back and be like, not great. Today, in today's world, even, it's like, yeah, major powers going out and conquering lands. This is very questionable, and it was made that way. Like he's supposed to be like, you're supposed to be the hero of the story, the main character, and yet you want to go out and lead wars. That's very weird. But yeah, beginning
Yeah.
with, yeah, Kitsune is a very confident person. Confident, again, he's been trained. He is very, very good at, you know, fighting, all kinds of fighting. He is very smart. He's had excellent education. Like I said, he knows he's bisexual, and no one has told him, or even no inkling that that's wrong. Everyone's okay with that. He has nothing to upend his world. But then one day his father walks in and says, no, because of this aspect of who you are, you can no longer live here. You're no longer my son. You no longer have a future here. You are actually being kicked out, you know, of the kingdom. And I think for anyone, that's just going to be just, you're upending someone's entire world, and they're going to start questioning everything. And for me, like, I'm very thankful my father was not anything like the king at all whatsoever. But the community I grew up in small Midwestern town, you know, I mean, I grew up with a surrounded by certain mindsets or views of the world, you know, a particular type of education, you know, controlled by certain, you know, people controlling the school. But like, I grew up in a very small town with this very small, I don't say small mindset, that sounds horrible, but limited views that you might not get at a larger school. So when I left, you know, my small Midwestern town, you know, went to college in a larger place, you know, went and moved out to New Mexico for a couple of years. Now I live in, you know, the suburbs of Chicago. It's like what I thought the world was, and the people who populated it, and the political views, religious views, like all of that has been upended for me at some point in my life, where I was all like, oh wow, these things that I grew up with are not the only way. It was very eye-opening for me and very discombobulating, and it turned my world over. It's mostly for the good, but you know, sometimes it was, and that's kind of the feeling I was trying to give Kitsune. He feels very small because he's not sure of his place in the world anymore. Everything he knew might not be true, and the future he saw for himself, now he's just this random person walking through the countryside. Yeah, and yeah, then the whole story is, how is he going to confront this? How is he going to live with it? How is he going to react to it? And he does begin to realize in this book and in the following ones, he's like, yeah, my father, maybe war isn't good, because he starts to see all the other lands around him, all the other kingdoms or countries, and how they have suffered from his father's actions. So him being out in the world, he begins to see like, oh, maybe that way isn't the best way. Maybe if I were to reclaim my place as a future king, what difference positive in the world could I make instead? Or even reverse what my father has done. You know, how can I make reparations?
Okay. So that answered my question, like that need for power, bloodthirst, winning, that was more cerebral for him.
Mm-hmm.
Actual like personality trait.
Correct. Yeah. Like he had never, you know, he had fought other, like in training, he had fought other people, but he had never actually taken a life. Like he never actually been in a battle, seen blood spilled. You know, he eventually does, but that has a major impact on him as a person. Like, oh, this is not glory. This is not winning. Like, there's nothing good to come from this.
What motivated you to become an author, to put stories out there? I mean, were you one of those people who like, oh yeah, I've been writing stories since I was 10? Or did something happen where you were just like, you know what? I think I'm good at this and I want to share it.
Yeah, I'm definitely one of those people who have been doing it my entire life. Even in elementary school, I wrote a picture book about a dog who got sick. And my librarian, the school librarian, was nice enough to humor me. You know, she put the little library card so people could check it out. So it was available in the library.
That's adorable.
It was, I still have it around here somewhere. But it was very cute. And I just loved her for doing that. What a way to encourage the kids to continue that type of pursuit. That was a really nice, in retrospect, I'm like, that was a really nice touch. But yeah, I've always wanted to write. Like I said, in high school, I wrote that, dinosaur book. I mean, it was a monstrosity. It was probably 400 some odd pages of complete crap. It was a learning experience. But yeah, I spent years in high school writing a book. So it has always been something I've wanted to do or enjoyed doing. I like creating stories and making them available, whether they're good or not, making them available for other people to read. Yeah.
Are you going to stick with fantasy, or do you have any other genre that you're interested in?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I never actually thought, when I started The King's Son, my favorite author is Michael Crichton. So again, Jurassic Park, but he doesn't necessarily write fantasy, but more science fiction, stuff that could possibly happen one day. And that type of stuff, that type of subject matter really, really fascinates me. It gets my interest. I would love to do something more along the lines of that, like a speculative fiction, where it still could be fantasy. It is fantasy to a level, but something that could happen, to you or I. The project I'm currently working on it starts off in the real world, very, Midwestern feel to it. And then something happens where all of a sudden it becomes a fantasy. So yeah, I'm still writing fantasy now, but at some point I would love to do something more sci-fi, or then kind of like I was saying earlier, do something more, Michael Crichton-esque in a way, something more based in reality, but still fantastical.
Excellent. I had a quick question. We talked about some of it earlier, but now that you say that this, story sort of turned into a fantasy novel, how did you find it just really easy and natural to get into? Or did you realize it was a fantasy, and did you have to learn about fantasy and add some elements or change some things?
So for the one I'm working on right now, so what you're saying?
Yeah, was it easy? Was it difficult? Was it natural?
It's interesting. So no spoiler here, but the story itself is the main character. There are a couple of rules that you're supposed to do when starting off a book. You're not supposed to wake up. The main character's not supposed to wake up or look into a mirror, or die in the first chapter. Of course, in the first book, my King's Son, Kitsune, wakes up in the first chapter. I'm always breaking those rules by accident. And the same thing with this one. Kitsune, the main character dies at the end of the first chapter. And he will wake up in the afterlife. And he has grown up in the Midwest in one of those small towns where there's a certain political view, a certain religious view that a lot of people lean towards. And it really made me, and this is going off of the past several years of the pandemic and watching things from my house, politics and religion and all types of butting heads, and a lot of people thinking that not necessarily wanting to die, but thinking, I can't wait until a time when this doesn't matter anymore, where everything will be harmony and beautiful and peaceful. And my mind was all but all these things that you think are going to make things peaceful and harmonious later on are part of what makes things, contentious now. So what happens if, and this is the main character, he dies while driving down the road thinking about this type of thing, and then he dies and he gets to the afterlife and finds out that things are still contentious and two-sided and black and white, like it is this way or that way, and there's no in between. And him dealing with that. Stop that. Sorry. Dealing with that, confronting that, and that's, so I needed to have something grounded in real life before he moved on to the more fantasy parts of it.
What about coming up with all the names and stuff? Is that, how do you do that?
So for like Kitsune and Miyobu and
Yeah.
in the King's Son or the Brass Machine series, a lot of it is based off of Japanese folklore, obviously. Kitsune, I've always had a thing with foxes. I love foxes. And that's what Kitsune, is a Japanese word for fox. But I wanted something more. I didn't want to like pluck out just random words and give them to characters. So like his father's name is King Oni, and Oni, demon. So he eventually in book 2 finds a sword called I'm probably gonna Tsukumogami. Can't remember. I think that's how you pronounce it. Which I believe is an inanimate object that has its own personality, soul. It is a living being in of itself while being an object. So while I attribute all these names to it to throughout the story, there's usually something to be read into it. Not always the case. Like I have some characters that are very Western sounding. I have a Joseph and an Allison, and but for the most part, I tried to find something pulling from that Japanese mythology that had a little bit of meaning behind it.
Okay, so you don't like put together two names and try to
no.
And...
Like the yokai again it's a spiritual, it's part of spiritual, a whole class of spiritual beings in Japanese mythology. It's an overarching that you would like a kitsune are a type of like Miyobu is the other main character, but a Miyobu is another type of yokai. Yeah.
Very cool. I like that. So, I mean, I just noticed, you had this thing. I'm a huge history fan, and I believe people need to know their history. And I believe that we are only taught certain history for whatever reason. I don't need to go into that. But you kind of have to search for history that is kind of the other part of the story, that they don't teach you in school, at least in America anyway, and definitely in like Russia and China and other places. So history is very important to me. So whenever I read something, I'm always, if there's some sort of historical element, I'm going to zero in on it, and I'm going to think, why is this being brought up? What is it being used for? Blah, blah, blah. So I noticed in your passage that you talk a little bit about a family history that was kind of full of secrets and mystery, and the main character kind of had a feeling for things, but he didn't know certain things for sure. And like this lady was his grandmother, but he wasn't maybe supposed to know that. So do you want to kind of talk about why that's important to you and why it's important to the story?
Sure. And you're right, there's a lot of hidden history, especially in the King's Son, the first book, where the King Oni is you see him twice. He's this very hidden character. You really don't know who he is yet. He's just powerful, maybe even magical in and of himself. We don't know that yet. But then he's throwing his son through these loops and creating all this upheaval. And then as Kitsune is traversing the world, he finds a lady in the mountain who is literally like a rock formation in a mountain. And then he kind of discovers like maybe we're related. How can that be? And then as he's going through these other countries and seeing how his father's decisions have affected the world around him, it makes him question things. And then in the following books, those layers begin to come off, get peeled away. And I think it makes for a very compelling story. Like I love TV shows or books that are like, oh, I had no idea that was coming. But hey, they had planted the seeds for that ahead of time. I'm like in the very first chapter of this book, there's a picture hanging on the wall in his father's throne room, and you just as casually mentioned, but then it becomes very important at the end of the book too. It's like it's like, oh, I didn't know that was actually a thing. I love those types of takeaways, intrigue.
So you're using it as a tool.
Definitely as a tool, and part of it, like you said, like you were kind of alluding to earlier, history. How we are taught may not actually reflect the real world. And that is definitely something I explore in the novels as well, where what Kitsune thinks, what his nation thinks, like his kingdom, the people he's supposed to be leading, they don't know the full truths because it is hidden from them, or they are led to believe something else entirely. Why is that? Who benefits from that? That is definitely something that I explore. It does a disservice. Obviously, we know that type of manipulation of individual people and groups of people is a disservice. It is an evil. Then you start to question, like, why do the people in power start to do this to begin with? And that was very fun to explore and to write about in the books, for sure.
Well, that's exciting. And we're going to be talking about secrets with J.E. So
Intrigue, definitely.
It definitely builds intrigue, that is for sure. If anyone out there listening is thinking about writing a book and you're confused, just throw a secret in there, and hold back.
Or 10.
Or 10, yeah. Duh.